Hey y'all, it's your friendly neighborhood English teacher, Miss Lancaster, here to help you with some poetry. I think you're going to like Pablo Neruda's poetry because he's very straightforward. You don't have to think too much about what he means. He more or less says what he means, which makes this a great way to introduce poetry and maybe help you be a little bit less afraid of it. I'm already tired of looking at my face, so let's switch back to my document camera. I am going to teach you one way to read poetry called TP-CASTT. This is not the only way to read poetry. There are literally thousands of correct ways to read poetry, and that's one of the things that makes poetry great. It's also one of the things that makes poetry frustrating for a lot of people. To help you better understand poetry, I'm going to teach you a strategy called TP-CASTT. TP-CASTT stands for title, paraphrase, connotation, attitude, shifts, title, and theme. So the first step begins before you even look at the poem. You take a look at the title and either make a comment on your thoughts or make a prediction as to what the poem's going to be about. So let's do that. The title of the poem we're looking at is Don't Go Far Off, Even for a Day. So if I were going to make a prediction or a comment on that title, it sounds like someone who is very attached to someone else. So that's what I'm going to write in my TP-CASTT chart. Alright, the next step in TP-CASTT is paraphrase. You write a short summary of the poem in the space provided. If the poem is not in standard or normal English, you write a complete paraphrase on a separate sheet of paper. So what that means is, if the poet has written in normal language, the way people usually speak, you could probably fit a summary of the poem in this little space here. But if you're reading something that is not the way we normally speak, like for example Shakespeare, then you probably need to paraphrase that in more detail, so you're going to need more space than this. With Pablo Neruda, he tells it like it is. He's very straightforward, so just use the space on the sheet here. So I think we should go through and read this poem together, and then I'll write my summary in the space next to paraphrase. Don't go far off, not even for a day, because I don't know how to say it. A day is long and I will be waiting for you, as in an empty station when the trains are parked off somewhere else, asleep. Don't leave me, even for an hour, because then the little drops of anguish will all run together. The smoke that roams looking for a home will drift into me, choking my lost heart. Oh, may your silhouette never dissolve on the beach. May your eyelids never flutter into the empty distance. Don't leave me for a second, my dearest, because in that moment you'll have gone so far, I'll wander mazily over all the earth, asking, will you come back? Will you leave me here, dying? So my first thought after reading this is it's about someone who is desperate to stay with someone, probably in a romantic way, but we can explore that a little bit further. Right now, we're just focusing on what does this poem mean on the surface. So I'm just going to take a look at it stanza by stanza and write down my thoughts in the paraphrase box. So at the first stanza, it's the speaker asks somebody to stay with them, not leave even for a day, because they will wait for them forever. So I'm going to put that in my summary box. Second stanza. Don't leave me even for an hour, because then the little drops of anguish will all run together. The smoke that roams looking for a home will drift into me, choking my lost heart. So basically he'll be very upset. Next stanza. May your silhouette never dissolve on the beach. May your eyelids never flutter into the empty distance. Don't leave me for a second, my dearest. It seems like he's wishing that they'll never leave. Okay, last one. Because in that moment you'll have gone so far, I'll wander mazily all over the earth, asking, will you come back? Will you leave me here dying? Okay, so he would search for them everywhere and always ask if they will come back. Okay, so I just wrote like a little summary of each stanza here. The speaker asks someone not to go away because they will wait forever. Speaker would be very upset. He wishes they will never leave him. The speaker will search for them always and wonder if they'll never come back. Okay, so the next step, connotations, is where things get a little funky. This is where we look at the actual tools that the poet uses in the poet's toolkit to make something into poetry rather than prose, non-poetry writing. This is what makes poetry into an art form. So we're looking at word choices, that's diction, connotation, and mood, and then literary devices. These are things like simile, metaphor, hyperbole, personification, and, any other figurative language, even sound devices like rhyme or alliteration or rhythm, any of that kind of thing. What do these things suggest? So I'm going to find anything that jumps out at me as being artistic in some kind of way, whether it's word choices or literary devices, and I'm just going to go circle them or underline them right now, and then I'm going to make a note of the ones that I think are most important in the box here. The first thing that stands out to me is how he repeats the word because. I think this makes him sound like he's hesitating or trying to figure out what he's trying to say. The next thing that stands out for me is the simile here, where he says he'll wait like an empty station when the trains are parked off somewhere else asleep. Trains are meant to transport people from one place to another, and it's unusual when they're just parked and not doing anything. It's almost kind of sad. Alright, second stanza. Don't leave me, even for an hour, because then the little drops of anguish will all run together, and the smoke that roams looking for a home will drift into me, choking my lost heart. Okay, so I can't really identify what type of figurative language is being used here, but I know it's figurative. I think little drops of anguish here might refer to tears, maybe. And then the smoke that roams looking for a home will drift into me, choking my lost heart. Looking for a home makes me think of loneliness. And if his heart is, the word choking has a very strong negative connotation. And then lost heart, it's very sad. And his heart doesn't have a home anymore because the person he loves is gone. So I'm going to write that. Alright, next stanza. May your silhouette never dissolve on the beach. May your eyelids never flutter into the empty distance. Okay. So if you don't know what a silhouette is, it's kind of like a shadow. If the silhouette dissolves on the beach, that means they're disappearing, walking into the distance. May your eyelids never flutter into the empty distance. That line kind of goes with disappearing as well. Don't leave me for a second, my dearest. Okay, so this right here, when he says don't leave me for a second, I think that's hyperbole, because obviously it's okay to leave somebody for a second. Asking, will you come back? Will you leave me here, dying? Okay, so obviously, if somebody leaves you, you're probably not going to die. He's exaggerating once again, but he's using it to make a point, once again emphasizing how much he loves this person and how badly he needs her. Alright, so I'm going to pick the things that I think are most significant for my annotation here and summarize them under connotation on my TP-CASTT sheet. Okay, so I picked out the things that I thought were most significant to the meaning here, and I summarized them in my connotation box. And there's kind of three parts to each of the things I pointed out. First, I identify what literary device is being used here, in this case a simile. Then I either paraphrase or quote the figurative language itself, And then last, I explain the effect that it has on the reader or towards the meaning. So I picked out 3 things here, and I'll just go through those real quick. So he uses a simile early in the poem when he says he'll wait for her like a train, quote, in an empty station when the trains are parked somewhere else asleep. So that was the end quote. So this is the example of a simile that I found, and the effect it has is that it emphasizes loneliness by giving you that image of a empty train station. Alright. Second, I pointed out some of this just general figurative language he uses in, I think, the second verse, where he talks about the, quote, little drops of anguish, and the, quote, smoke that roams looking for a home will drift into me, choking my lost heart. All right, end quote. I think that conveys a feeling of depression and emptiness. And then I also pointed out the very strong negative and sad connotations on the words choking and lost heart. All right, the last piece that I pointed out here was his hyperbole in the last 2 stanzas, where he says, don't leave me for a second, and I'll wander all over the earth asking, will you leave me here dying? Notice here I used what's called an ellipsis to take out the part of the quote that I'm not interested in. This just shows that I've taken some words out. You can do that in your own analysis, that's fine. But all of this is obviously exaggeration, but it's exaggerating to emphasize how desperate he feels in his love for this woman, I'm assuming. Okay. The next step is to identify the speaker's attitude or tone in the poem. I would call it loving and desperate. Now you look at shifts. Where does the poem change, and what do you think is changing? A lot of times shifts are signaled by the words but, however, or suddenly, but I don't really see any of that in this particular poem. I did notice one shift as the poem continued, and it's a shift in the tone. So let's look back at it. So in the first stanza, he says, don't leave for a day, and I would call the tone just kind of sad here. Then the time period shortens. He says, don't leave me for an hour, and then it signals how lonely he'll be if she leaves. And then it says, don't leave me for a second, and it emphasizes how desperate he is and just how sad he would be, how depressed he would be if she left. But it shifts from just kind of sad, saying, don't leave me for a day, to saying, don't leave me for a second, because I will be dying if you leave me. So that's what I'm going to write in my shifts box. Alright, and last, we talk about the theme. What lesson or message is the speaker communicating through this poem? The lesson that I get from this is that love can make you feel dependent on other people. Alright, so to review one more time, TP-CASTT is looking at the title, comment on it, make a prediction first. Paraphrase, you write a short summary of the poem in the space provided. I recommend take it about stanza by stanza. Connotations is the hard part. You look for things like figurative language or specific word choices that give off a strong connotation, and you give evidence, you identify it, give evidence of it, and then explain the effect it has. Then you look at the attitude or the tone. You look for shifts. Revisit the title one more time, and then you figure out the theme or the overall point of the whole poem. And that's how you do TP-CASTT.